A millionaire abandons a blind puppy, trying to erase what he considered a flaw in his perfect life. On the other side of the city, a humble girl finds the little animal and decides to rescue it. What she does next is unbelievable. The sun had not yet risen when Alex Montgomery crossed the golden gates of his mansion in Beverly Hills, Los Angeles. His black Porsche cut through the deserted streets of the metropolis as he adjusted his pure silk Italian tie, a ritual he repeated every time he felt anxious. On the passenger seat, a cardboard box moved slightly. "I can't afford to have a stain on my reputation," he muttered to himself, his brown eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, checking if his gray hair was still impeccable. At 55, Alex had built an empire in the real estate market, and his image was his greatest asset. His cell phone rang, breaking the morning silence. It was Helen, his wife. "Alex, where are you? We need to talk about Princess." "I'm taking care of it right now," he cut her off, his voice as cold as the air conditioning blowing inside the car. "When I get back, we won't have this problem anymore." "But honey, it's just a blind puppy. We can take care of it, give it a chance." Alex abruptly hung up the phone. His wife's suggestion irritated him deeply. In his world, there was no room for imperfections. The news that his award-winning golden retriever, Princess, had given birth to a puppy with visual impairment disturbed him more than he cared to admit. The car was now on a less busy road, moving away from the city center. The first rays of sun were beginning to tinge the sky pink when Alex parked near a vacant lot. He picked up the box carefully, as if afraid someone might see him. "It's better this way," he justified mentally as he left the box under a tree. Inside, a small golden puppy moved, searching for its mother's warmth. Its eyes, though unable to see, seemed fixed on Alex, as if they could see through his soul. Back in the car, Alex turned on the radio to drown out his thoughts. The first song that played was "The Times They Are A-Changin' by Bob Dylan. Irritated, he changed the station. He didn't need anything else to make him reflect on his actions. At the mansion, Helen was waiting for him in the main room, her red eyes betraying that she had been crying. Princess was lying at her feet, restless. "It's done," he announced, without looking directly at his wife. "Call the vet clinic and schedule an appointment for Princess. We need to make sure she's well for next month's show." "How can you?" Helen asked, her voice trembling with indignation. "How can you be so—" "Practical," he completed, pouring himself a coffee. "Someone needs to be, Helen. I built all this," he gestured, indicating the mansion, "by being practical. There's no room for sentimentality in the business world. You should know that after so many years." At that moment, his cell phone vibrated with a notification. It was a message from Richard Myers, his personal assistant. "Urgent. The Truth newspaper is preparing an article about irregularities in your companies. Journalist Mark Vieira wants an interview." Alex felt his blood run cold. Mark Vieira was known for his relentless investigations that had already brought down other powerful businessmen. Trying to maintain his composure, he quickly replied, "Schedule a meeting with our press office immediately." "Are you okay?" asked Helen, noticing his sudden change of expression. "Perfectly fine," he replied, putting the cell phone in his Italian suit pocket. "I have an important meeting now. Don't wait for me for lunch." As he walked towards the garage, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change in his perfectly controlled life. What he didn't know was that the small being he had just abandoned would be the catalyst for a transformation much greater than any scandal he might face. On the horizon, the sun finally emerged completely, illuminating a city that was beginning to wake up. Somewhere among the shadows of a Los Angeles that Alex preferred to ignore, a small blind puppy awaited its fate, not knowing that its story was just beginning. The alarm hadn't gone off yet when Clara was already up, packing her worn-out backpack for another school day. At 10 years old, she had a well-established routine. She woke up early to prepare breakfast for herself and her father, Charlie, who slept exhausted after another night looking for a job. The small apartment in the Watts neighborhood, on the outskirts of Los Angeles, was simple but cozy. On the walls, photos in cheap frames told the story of a family that, despite challenges, remained united. Clara paused for a moment in front of her mother's photo, gently touching the glass with her fingertips. "Good morning, Mum," she whispered, as she did every morning. "Today is going to be a special day. I can feel it." In the kitchen, she prepared coffee and separated some cookies. The smell of freshly brewed coffee reached Charlie's room, who appeared at the door, still sleepy. "Already up, Princess?" he asked, trying to hide his fatigue with a smile. "You should rest more." Clara poured a cup of coffee for her father. "I slept well, Dad. And you? Did you get anything yesterday?" Charlie sighed, running his hand through his prematurely grey hair. At 38, worries had already left their marks. "Not yet, sweetie. But today I have 2 promising interviews. A mechanic shop in Compton and a transport company in Inglewood. Everything will work out," Clara stated, with a conviction that only children can have. "You're the best mechanic I know." As they had coffee, Clara shared her dreams with her father, as she did every morning. "Did you know there are veterinarians who only take care of wild animals? Imagine, Dad, being able to help all those little creatures." Charlie smiled, admiring his daughter's determination. Since she was little, Clara had shown a special connection with animals. Even in the toughest times, when they could barely buy food, she always found a way to help the street animals in the neighborhood, sharing her lunch or simply offering affection. "One day you'll be an amazing vet, Princess," he assured her, checking his watch. "Now you'd better go or you'll be late for school." Clara hugged her father, grabbed her backpack, and went out to the street. The sun was still rising, painting the sky in pink hues. She always left early to be able to take the path slowly, observing the birds and cats she already knew by name. That morning, however, something different caught her attention. As she passed a lot near the school, she heard a low sound, almost imperceptible. It sounded like crying, but not from a child. "Is anyone there?" she called, approaching cautiously. The sound became clearer. It was a puppy. Clara followed the cry until she found a cardboard box partially hidden under a tree. Inside, a small golden retriever was struggling, frightened. "Calm down, little one," Clara whispered, crouching next to the box. "I won't hurt you." As she picked up the puppy, she noticed something different. Its eyes, though beautiful, didn't focus on anything. They moved randomly, as if searching for light in permanent darkness. "You can't see, can you?" she murmured, feeling her heart tighten. "Who could abandon you like this?" The puppy, feeling the warmth of Clara's arms, began to calm down. Its nose moved, sniffing the air, gradually recognizing the one who would be its savior. Clara looked at her watch. It was almost time for class, but how could she leave that puppy there, alone and defenseless? Her decision was quick. She took the notebooks out of her backpack, putting them in the cardboard box, and accommodated the puppy in the space that was left. "I'm going to take you home," she decided. "I don't know how Dad will react, but I can't leave you here." As she walked back home, Clara was already imagining 1,000 arguments to convince her father to keep the puppy. What she didn't know was that that small being, abandoned by someone who saw imperfection as a weakness, would be the catalyst for extraordinary changes in her life. In the back seat of a Porsche passing in the distance, Alex Montgomery nervously adjusted his tie, not imagining that his act of cruelty had just set in motion a series of events that would transform not only his life, but that of everyone around him. Clara climbed the stairs of the building with her heart racing, the puppy nestled in her backpack. At each step, she mentally rehearsed how she would convince her father. On the 3rd floor, she stopped to catch her breath and caress the small animal, which remained surprisingly calm. "Everything will be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to the puppy. As she opened the apartment door, she found Charlie finishing getting ready for the interviews. He was adjusting the only tie he owned when he noticed something different in his daughter's expression. "Clara, what are you doing home at this time? Did something happen at school?" In response, the girl carefully opened her backpack. The puppy, feeling free, moved its nose, sniffing the unfamiliar environment. Charlie's eyes widened, leaving his tie half crooked. "Honey, what is this?" "Dad, please listen to me," Clara began, the words coming out hurriedly. "I found him abandoned near the school. He's hungry, alone, and he's blind, Dad. I couldn't leave him there." Charlie ran his hand over his face, a gesture Clara knew well. It was what he did when faced with a difficult situation. "Clara, you know our situation. We can barely maintain ourselves. How are we going to take care of a dog, especially one that needs special care?" The puppy, as if understanding that it was the subject of the conversation, began to move towards Charlie's voice, its nose working non-stop. "Look, Dad," Clara argued, observing the animal's movement. "He's already trying to get to know the environment. Even without seeing, he's smart. Please, let's give him a chance. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Alex Montgomery was facing his own storm. In his office on the top floor of one of the most luxurious buildings on Wilshire Boulevard, he stared at the computer screen with a tense expression. "This is absurd," he vociferated, hitting the desk. How did this journalist get this information? Richard Myers, his assistant, remained silent, knowing that any word could worsen the boss's mood. On the screen, Mark Vieira's email detailed a series of questions about labor practices in Montgomery's companies. "Sir," Richard finally risked, "perhaps we should consider a more conciliatory strategy." Alex stood up abruptly, going to the window that offered a panoramic view of the city. Down below, Los Angeles pulsed, oblivious to the dramas unfolding at the heights. "Conciliation is for the weak, Richard. I want you to contact our lawyers immediately. We are going to sue this newspaper for defamation." At that moment, Helen, his wife, entered the office without announcing. Her normally serene face was marked by concern. "Alex, we need to talk. Princess isn't well since you took the puppy. She barely eats, barks all night." "Not now, Helen." He cut her off without averting his gaze from the window. "I'm solving more important problems." "More important?" Helen's voice trembled with indignation. "How can you say that? That puppy was part of our family." "Family?" Alex turned, laughing humorlessly. "That animal was an imperfection that could tarnish our reputation. Can you imagine the comments at the club? The great Alex Montgomery with a defective dog." Helen took a step back as if she had been slapped. "You've changed so much. The man I fell in love with would never say something like that." Back at Clara's apartment, Charlie watched his daughter playing with the puppy in the small backyard of the service area. The animal, despite its visual impairment, was already demonstrating an incredible ability to orient itself by sound and smell. "Have you thought of a name for him?" Charlie asked, surprising Clara. The girl turned, her eyes shining with hope. "You mean we can keep him?" Charlie approached, crouching next to his daughter. "1-week trial. If we can't handle it, we need to find someone who can take care of him properly." Clara hugged her father tightly, tears of joy running down her face. "I'm going to call him Brave, Dad, because even without seeing, he's very courageous." The puppy, hearing the new name, tilted its head to the side and wagged its tail as if approving the choice. At that moment, as father and daughter laughed together, little Brave was taking his first steps towards a new life, very different from the one Alex Montgomery had planned for him. 3 weeks had passed since Brave came into Clara's life. The small apartment in Watts, once quiet, now filled with joyful barks and laughter. To Charlie's surprise, the puppy not only adapted quickly to the space but also demonstrated extraordinary intelligence. On a Saturday afternoon, while Clara was doing her homework at the kitchen table, something happened that would forever change her perception of Brave. The puppy, which was napping near her feet, suddenly raised its head and started barking insistently. "What is it, Brave?" Clara asked, bending down to pet him. The puppy got up and ran towards the bathroom, stopping in front of the closed door. Clara followed, intrigued. When she opened the door, she discovered that a faucet had been left slightly open and water was silently dripping, forming a small puddle on the floor. "How did you know?" she whispered, amazed. The following week, Clara began to pay more attention to Brave's special abilities. She noticed how he could distinguish different people by smell long before they arrived, how he recognized the specific sound of Charlie's car returning from work. Yes, her father had finally gotten the job at the mechanic shop. "Dad, Brave is amazing!" Clara would exclaim every time the dog demonstrated a new ability. "Today he found my math notebook that had fallen behind the sofa, just by smell." Charlie, who initially had his reservations, now found himself impressed with the animal's capabilities. "He compensates for the lack of vision with other senses," he explained to his daughter. "It's as if nature had given him superpowers in exchange." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Alex Montgomery was facing an increasingly complicated situation. Mark Vieira's article was about to be published, and rumors were already beginning to circulate in the high business circles of Los Angeles. "Mr. Montgomery," his secretary interrupted a tense meeting with the lawyers. "Your wife is on line 3. She says it's urgent." Alex sighed irritably. "I can't answer now." "She insists, sir. She said Princess is very ill and needs to be taken to the vet." For a brief moment, something like guilt crossed the businessman's face. The image of the puppy he had abandoned returned to his mind, but he quickly pushed it away. "Tell her I'll call later." he replied dryly, turning his attention back to the documents on his desk. What Alex didn't know was that, at that exact moment, Clara was entering Brave in a local contest for dogs with special abilities. She had seen the poster at the neighborhood vet clinic, where she had taken the puppy for vaccines, courtesy of Charlie's first salary at the mechanic shop. "Do you think we can do it, buddy?" she asked the dog, who responded by licking her face. The prize would be enough to buy a lot of dog food and still help Dad with the bills. Clara began training Brave in the small yard of the building. To her surprise, the puppy learned with impressive speed. She developed a system of sound commands, clapping in different rhythms for different actions. Brave not only memorized each command, but began to anticipate her movements. The neighbors stopped to watch the training sessions, amazed at the synchrony between the girl and the dog. Mrs. Johnson, the lady from the first floor who initially feared the defective dog, was now Brave's biggest fan. "This dog is blessed," she would comment, offering homemade cookies to Clara. "God closes a door and opens a window, my child. His lack of vision is compensated by a special heart." One day during training, Clara made a surprising discovery. Brave started acting strangely, barking insistently at a corner of the yard. Upon investigating, she found a baby bird that had fallen from its nest, shivering with cold. "How did you know?" she asked, amazed, while helping to put the bird back in the nest. "You can't see, but you feel when someone needs help, don't you?" That night, lying in her bed with Brave at her feet, Clara wrote in her diary, "Sometimes people think they know what's perfect or imperfect, but Brave taught me that true perfection is in doing the best with what we have. He doesn't need eyes to see the world. He feels it with his heart." What Clara didn't imagine was that her words would soon find an echo in the life of someone who desperately needed to relearn to see the world through different eyes. The headline of The Truth newspaper blazed in bold letters, "Montgomery Empire, the hidden face of success." Alex let the newspaper fall onto the breakfast table, his hands trembling slightly. Mark Vieira's article was devastating, exposing questionable labor practices and numerous cases of moral harassment in his companies. "This is just the beginning," warned Richard, his assistant, on the other end of the phone line. "Social media is in an uproar, and 3 major investors have already cancelled meetings." Helena observed her husband in silence, pouring herself a cup of tea. Princess, lying at her feet, was thinner and more listless since the disappearance of her puppy. "Aren't you going to say anything?" Alvaro asked his wife, his voice heavy with bitterness. "What do you want me to say, Alvaro?" "That I'm surprised. I'm not. You've built your life treating people and animals as disposable pieces. It was only a matter of time before someone exposed that." On the other side of the city, Claire woke up excited. There were only 2 weeks left until the Special Pet Talents contest, and Brave was progressing impressively. In the small courtyard of the building, she had improvised a training circuit with household objects. Old chairs formed a slalom, cardboard boxes created tunnels, and water-filled pet bottles served as markers. "Come on, Brave," she called, clapping her hands in a specific rhythm that meant complete circuit. The puppy, now larger and stronger, positioned itself at the makeshift starting line. Charles, who had the day off that Saturday, watched the training sessions with pride. "Honey, have you thought that Brave could help other people?" Claire paused the training, curious. "What do you mean, Dad?" "Well, he has this special gift of perceiving things we can't. Imagine how many people he could help. There are a lot of people who need a special friend like him." Charles's words planted a seed in Claire's mind. For the rest of the training, she began to imagine greater possibilities for Brave. It wasn't just about winning a contest. It was about showing the world that limitations can be transformed into extraordinary gifts. At the Montenegro mansion, the situation was worsening by the hour. Alvaro's cell phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from journalists and old friends, wanting to distance themselves from the scandal. During lunch, Helena made the announcement he feared. "I'm going to spend some time at my sister's house," she declared, rising from the table. "I need to think about what we'll do from here on out." "Do what?" "There's nothing to think about. This is a passing storm everyone will soon forget." "No, Alvaro," Helena replied, her voice firm. "The problem is that you still haven't understood. It's not just the accusations in the newspaper, it's who you've become. The man who abandoned a helpless puppy because he wasn't perfect enough." Helena's words hit Alvaro like a punch. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to think about the little golden retriever he had abandoned. Where was he? Had he survived? Later that afternoon, while Claire and Brave rested after another intense training session, the girl had an idea. She took paper and pen and began to write a letter. "Dear former owner of Brave," she began, not knowing that her words would soon find a very specific recipient. "I wanted you to know that the puppy you thought was worthless has become the most special being in the world." Mrs. Zephyr, who was watching Claire write, smiled wisely. "Sometimes, my child, the universe has mysterious ways of correcting injustices. Who knows, maybe this letter will find its way." What none of them imagined was that very soon, the paths of Claire, Brave, and Alvaro Montenegro would cross in a way that would change their lives forever. On the horizon, the sun was setting over São Paulo, tinting the sky in orange hues, as if announcing that great changes were coming. Claire didn't know exactly how she would get her letter to Brave's former owner, but something in her heart told her it was the right thing to do. After several attempts, she finally finished writing. "And you know what's most incredible? Brave doesn't need eyes to see the goodness in people. He taught me that sometimes we need to lose something to gain an even greater gift. When you abandoned him, thinking he was imperfect, you didn't imagine you were giving the world a true hero. He saved my family, brought joy to our entire building, and now he's going to participate in a contest that can help many other people. Maybe one day you'll see that true imperfection isn't in the eyes that can't see, but in the heart that refuses to see." Mrs. Zephyr, who had become a sort of adopted grandmother to Claire, suggested publishing the letter in the neighborhood newspaper. "Who knows? That way it might reach where it needs to go," said the old lady, her eyes shining with wisdom. The small community newspaper Voices of Capone published the letter in full, along with a photo of Claire and Brave during one of their training sessions. By one of those coincidences that destiny orchestrates, Marcus Vieira, the same journalist who was investigating Alvaro Montenegro, was researching positive stories from the periphery when he came across the text. Something in the story intrigued him. A blind golden retriever, abandoned about 2 months ago. The dates coincided with information he had collected about the Montenegro's personal life. He decided to make a copy of the letter. In the now silent Montenegro mansion, Alvaro spent sleepless nights. Helena had left for her sister's house, taking Princess with her. The empire he had built was beginning to crumble. 3 of his biggest contracts had been cancelled, and his company's stocks were plummeting. It was on one of these sleepless nights that Richard, his assistant, arrived with a brown envelope. "Sir, journalist Marcus Vieira left this at reception. He said you might be interested." Alvaro opened the envelope with disdain, expecting to find more accusations. But what he read made his world stop. Claire's letter, with its disconcerting sincerity, hit him like lightning. The girl's words echoed in his mind, bringing up memories he had long tried to suppress. He remembered his own childhood in the interior of São Paulo, when his best friend was a caramel-colored mutt. How that dog consoled him on days when his father came home drunk. How he had to abandon it when the family moved to the capital in search of a better life. "What have I become?" he muttered to himself, his hands trembling as he held the newspaper photo. In it, a girl smiled, hugging a golden retriever that, even without being able to see, seemed to radiate happiness. Meanwhile, in the building's courtyard, Claire and Brave were conducting their night training. The girl had discovered that the dog concentrated better when there was less noise on the street. Under the streetlights, she guided Brave through an increasingly complex course. "Amazing!" exclaimed Charles, who had just arrived from the workshop. "How does he manage to avoid all the obstacles without seeing anything?" "It's because he trusts me, Dad," Claire replied, caressing Brave's ears. "And I trust him. It's like we're one." That night, 2 seemingly distant worlds began to approach. While Claire dreamed of the contest that could change their lives, Alvaro Montenegro faced the distorted reflection of who he had become. The letter from a 10-year-old girl, written with the purity that only children possess, began to break down the wall of arrogance he had built over the years. From the top of his penthouse apartment, Alvaro observed the city lights holding the already crumpled letter that had been read so many times. Somewhere down there, a dog he had considered imperfect was about to prove that true gifts are not always visible to the eyes. 1 week before the Special Pet Talents contest, Claire faced her first big challenge. The registration fee, which initially seemed affordable, now weighed heavily on the already tight family budget. Charles had used his savings to buy parts for the workshop, and the next paycheck wouldn't come for another 2 weeks. "Don't worry, Dad," said Claire, trying to hide her disappointment. "We can try again next year." But Brave, as if sensing his young trainer's sadness, began to bark rhythmically, drawing the attention of the neighbors. Soon, a small crowd had formed in the building's courtyard. "How about we do a benefit performance?" suggested Mrs. Zephyr, always with a solution on the tip of her tongue. "We charge a symbolic amount and have a community afternoon tea." The idea caught on like wildfire. The residents of the building and the neighborhood quickly organized themselves. Mr. Jose, the retired baker from the second floor, offered to make cakes and bread. Mrs. Maria, a seamstress, improvised a small grandstand with chairs and cushions. On the other side of the city, Alvaro Montenegro was going through his own transformation. After 3 sleepless nights rereading Claire's letter, he made a decision that surprised everyone. "Richard," he called his assistant, "cancel all my appointments for this week and get in touch with Helena." "But sir, what about the shareholders' meeting?" "For the first time in my life, Richard, there are things more important than business." Alvaro drove to his sister-in-law's house, where Helena was staying. He found Princess in the garden, thinner and more dejected than he remembered. The dog's accusing gaze seemed to penetrate his soul. "I came to apologize," he said simply, when Helena answered the door. "Apologize for what exactly, Alvaro? For the puppy? For the employees? For becoming this man I barely recognize?" "For everything," he replied, his voice breaking for the first time in years. "I read something that made me realize, that made me remember who I was before all this success." Helena observed her husband cautiously. In 20 years of marriage, she had never seen him so vulnerable. Back in Capão Redondo, the benefit event for Brave had turned into a true community celebration. Claire presented all the tricks she had taught the dog, how he could find hidden objects just by smell, how he avoided obstacles following sound commands, how he could identify different emotions in people's voices. "It's impressive," commented a lady in the audience, wiping away tears. "How something that seemed like a limitation has turned into such a special gift." Marcus Vieira, the journalist, observed everything discreetly, making notes in his notebook. There was something in Claire and Brave's story that went beyond the obvious. The coincidence of dates, the dog's breed, the description of the abandonment, everything pointed to a connection with Alvaro Montenegro. "Hey, little one," he called, approaching Claire after the presentation. "Can I ask you some questions about how you found Brave?" Claire, still euphoric from the event's success, told all the details of that fateful morning. The journalist listened attentively, his suspicions confirmed with each word. At the end of the day, the community had not only raised enough for the contest registration, but also to buy a new uniform for Claire and a special collar for Brave. "See," said Mrs. Zephyr, hugging the girl, "when we do good, good comes back multiplied." What no one knew was that same night, Alvaro Montenegro was in his office, obsessively researching guide dogs and animals with special needs. The photo of Claire and Brave in the community newspaper was pinned to his board, a constant reminder of what he had done and what he needed to fix. "It's not too late," he muttered to himself, starting to write on a blank sheet. "There's always time to start over." On the eve of the contest, a mysterious package arrived at Claire's building. The delivery man, wearing a uniform from a luxury pet shop, asked specifically for Claire and Brave. Inside the box was an Italian leather collar with Brave engraved in silver, along with a complete set of accessories for competition presentations. "But who sent this?" asked Charles, examining the high-quality items. "There's no sender," Claire replied, finding only a small card that said, "For those who see with their heart. Good luck tomorrow." A few blocks away, Marcus Vieira was connecting the last dots of his investigation in his small office. Photos, newspaper clippings, and notes covered an entire wall. In the center, 2 images stood out: the photo of Claire and Brave in the community newspaper, and an old report about the Montenegros, where Princess, the award-winning golden retriever, appeared prominently. "The dates match perfectly," muttered the journalist, marking something in his notebook. "The abandonment of the puppy, the beginning of the accusations, the change in Montenegro's behavior." His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was a source from inside the Montenegro mansion. "The boss is different," said the voice on the other end of the line. He spends hours locked in his office researching special animals. Yesterday I found him crying looking at old photos from when he was a child. In the Montenegro apartment, Alvaro observed the city through the window of his office, holding a dusty picture frame. In the photo, a boy of about 10 smiled next to a caramel-colored mutt. "Why did I let this happen to me, Thunder?" he asked the image of the dog from his childhood. "How could I become exactly the kind of person I despised the most?" Helena, who had agreed to return home after the sincere conversation with her husband, found him in this moment of vulnerability. "It's the first time in years I've seen this photo," she commented softly. "Thunder was my best friend when we were poor," Alvaro replied, his voice choked. "He had no pedigree, was full of problems, but loved me unconditionally. When we got rich, well, you know what happened. It's never too late to fix our mistakes, Alvaro." In Capão Redondo, Claire was finalizing the last preparations for the big day. Brave, now wearing his new collar, looked more elegant than ever. The girl had spent the afternoon rehearsing her presentation with her father and neighbors as the audience. "Daughter, whatever the result tomorrow, I want you to know that I'm very proud of you," said Charles, hugging her. "It's not just about the competition, Dad," Claire replied, caressing Brave. "It's about everything Brave has taught us. About not giving up, about seeing beauty where others only see flaws." Mrs. Zephyr, who was watching the scene, added her wisdom. "You know, my child, sometimes God puts angels in our path. Some have wings, others have 4 paws and a heart bigger than the world." That night, as the city prepared to sleep, different characters in this story found themselves in moments of reflection. Claire, in her room, lying with Brave at her feet, mentally reviewed each step of the presentation. Alvaro, in his mansion, planned how he could anonymously attend the next day's contest. Marcus Vieira, in his office, decided what would be the best moment to reveal the connection he had discovered. What none of them knew was that destiny had prepared a much more dramatic encounter than any of them could imagine. The special Pet Talents contest would be just the beginning of a series of events that would change their lives forever. In the sky, a full moon illuminated São Paulo, its different realities, its contrasts, and its stories of redemption. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring so that the next day, all paths would converge at a single point, where the true meaning of perfection would finally be revealed. The Villa Lobos Park Event Center was buzzing with activity on that Saturday morning. Dozens of families with their special pets arrived for the contest, creating an atmosphere of expectation and emotion. Claire, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress, firmly held Brave's leash, who proudly displayed his new collar. "Nervous, honey?" asked Charles, carrying a small backpack with water and treats for Brave. "A little," admitted Claire, adjusting the ribbon in her hair. "But Brave is so calm, it's as if he knows today is special." A few meters away, discreetly seated in the last rows of the auditorium, Alvaro Montenegro adjusted his dark glasses. He had arrived early, choosing a strategic place from where he could observe everything without being noticed. Helena, who had insisted on accompanying him, gently squeezed his hand. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she whispered. "I need to see," he replied simply. "I need to understand." Marcus Vieira circulated around the place with his press badge, photographing the participants and taking notes. His eyes alternated between Claire and Brave and the distant figure of Alvaro Montenegro, whom he had recognized despite the disguise. The presenter took the stage, starting the event. "Welcome to the first Special Pet Talents contest. Today we celebrate not the limitations, but the extraordinary gifts that our 4-legged friends develop in overcoming their challenges." Claire was the 12th presentation. As she waited her turn backstage, she watched in awe as other special dogs performed. There was a 3-legged German Shepherd doing impressive acrobatics, a deaf Dalmatian responding to sign language commands, a Labrador helping children with autism. "Number 12, Claire and Brave, you're next," announced one of the organizers. The moment she stepped on stage, Claire felt all her nervousness transform into determination. The audience fell silent, intrigued by the golden retriever that moved with such confidence despite eyes that couldn't see. "Good afternoon," Claire began, her small but firm voice in the microphone. "This is Brave. Some might think he's limited because he can't see, but today we're going to show that sometimes the most important eyes are those of the heart." In the last rows, Alvaro felt his heart race. The voice of that girl, so full of conviction and love, made his hands tremble slightly. Claire began the presentation with a series of sound commands. Valiant navigated obstacles with impressive precision, guided only by the sound of claps and his young trainer's voice. But the most emotional moment was yet to come. "Now," Claire announced, "we'll show how Valiant can identify emotions just by people's voices." She invited 3 volunteers from the audience. Each was to say the same phrase, "Good morning, Valiant," but with different emotions: joy, sadness, and fear. To everyone's amazement, the dog reacted differently to each emotion, offering comfort for the sad voice, joy for the happy voice, and security for the scared voice. "Extraordinary," murmured one of the judges, wiping away a tear. In the audience, Alvaro Montenegro removed his dark glasses, unable to contain his own emotion. That same dog he had considered defective was there, transforming his supposed limitations into unique gifts. Marcus Vieira photographed everything, his journalistic mind already constructing the narrative. From abandonment to redemption, the story of the dog who taught a millionaire to see with his heart. The presentation reached its climax when Claire blindfolded herself. "To understand Valiant's world," she explained, "I started training blindfolded too. I discovered that when we trust each other, nothing is impossible." What happened next left the audience in absolute silence. Claire and Valiant performed a perfectly synchronized choreography, both blindfolded, guided only by mutual trust and the sound of soft instrumental music. At the end of the presentation, the auditorium erupted in applause. Donna Zephyr, who was watching from the front row along with other residents of the building, was openly crying. Carlos could barely contain his pride, his hands sore from clapping so much. But fate still had a surprise in store for that day. As Claire and Valiant were leaving the stage, a familiar scent made the dog suddenly stop. His nose rose, sniffing the air intensely. Even after months, even without ever having seen his former owner, Valiant recognized Alvaro Montenegro's characteristic scent. Valiant's sudden behavior caught Claire by surprise. The dog, normally so obedient, was pulling the leash towards the last rows of the auditorium, his nose raised and his ears alert. "Valiant, what is it?" Claire whispered, trying to calm him as the judges deliberated on the presentations. In the last row, Alvaro Montenegro was paralyzed. Helena, beside him, immediately recognized the characteristic mannerisms of Princess's puppy. The businessman tried to stand up to leave discreetly, but his legs felt too heavy. Marcus Vieira observed the scene, his camera capturing every moment. Years of investigative journalism had taught him to recognize when a story was about to reach its climax. "Excuse me," Claire asked, as she was practically guided by Valiant between the rows of chairs. The dog seemed to have a mission, ignoring all other scents and sounds in the environment. Then something extraordinary happened. Valiant stopped right in front of Alvaro, sat down and emitted a soft whine. Not of fear or sadness, but of recognition. It was the same sound he made when he found something precious that had been lost. He recognized you?" Claire asked, her voice small but firm, looking at the well-dressed man in front of her. Alvaro felt the weight of all his actions in that moment. The tears he had long suppressed began to roll down his face. Helena beside him held his hand tightly. "Yes," he answered, his voice choked. I am Valiant's former owner." The auditorium, which had been vibrating with the presentations before, now silently observed the scene unfolding. Carlos, who had approached when he saw his daughter move away, arrived in time to hear the confession. "It was you?" Claire asked, her small hands caressing Valiant's ears, who remained surprisingly calm. "You were the one who abandoned him." The question, asked with the characteristic sincerity of children, hit Alvaro like lightning. He knelt down, coming to Claire and Valiant's level. "Yes," he admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "And that was the biggest mistake of my life." To everyone's surprise, Valiant moved towards Alvaro, his nose gently touching the businessman's hand. There was no anger or fear in his gestures, only that pure understanding that only animals seem to possess. "He forgave you," Claire said simply, observing the interaction. "Valiant always knows when someone is truly sorry." Marcus Vieira approached, his notepad in hand, but something in Helena's look made him step back. This was not a moment for headlines or scandals. It was a moment of redemption. "You sent the new collar, didn't you?" Claire asked, a sudden understanding illuminating her face. Alvaro nodded, unable to contain his tears. "I read your letter in the neighborhood newspaper. Your words, they made me remember who I was before I lost my way." Carlos observed the scene with a mix of emotions. As a father, his first instinct was to protect Claire from any suffering. But there was something in the vulnerability of that man, clearly powerful and important, breaking down in tears in front of a blind dog and a 10-year-old girl, that touched his heart. "What happened to his mother?" Claire asked, referring to Princess. "She's at home, sweetie," Helena answered softly, approaching. "Sad and missing her puppy every day." It was then that Claire had an idea. One of those ideas that only a child in their innocent wisdom could have. An idea that would forever change the course of that story and the lives of everyone present. Claire looked at Valiant, then at Alvaro and Helena, and finally at her father, her eyes shining with that certainty that only children possess. "Why can't Valiant have two families?" she asked, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "He can visit his mom on weekends, like I used to do when I visited my aunt in the countryside." The silence that followed her proposal was broken only by the soft sound of Valiant's tail tapping on the floor, as if approving the idea. "Two families," repeated Alvaro, looking at Helena, who had an understanding smile on her face. "Yes," Claire continued, getting excited about her own idea. "You said his mom is sad, right? And Valiant is so special that he has enough love for everyone. He can live with us because he's already used to our apartment and the training, but he can visit his mom whenever he wants." Carlos approached, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Claire, not everything is that simple." "Why not?" she questioned, with that childlike logic that often makes more sense than adult complexity. "Valiant taught me that family is who loves and cares. And the more love, the better, right?" Helena wiped away a tear, touched by the purity of that reasoning. "You know she's right, Alvaro. Sometimes we complicate things so much." The businessman looked around. The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his answer. Marcus Vieira had put away his notepad, also captured by the magic of that moment. "But what about the contest?" someone from the audience asked, reminding everyone that they were in the middle of a competition. "The contest?" Claire exclaimed, suddenly remembering. "We need to go backstage, Valiant. We still have a chance to win the prize." "The prize?" Alvaro murmured, an idea beginning to form in his mind. He stood up, straightened his suit, and for the first time that day smiled genuinely. "Claire, if you'll allow me, I'd like to make a suggestion to the event organizers." He walked to the stage, where the judges were still deliberating. After a brief conversation, the presenter took the microphone, calling everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special announcement. Mr. Alvaro Montenegro, one of our greatest businessmen, has just proposed the creation of a foundation dedicated to animals with special needs. The contest prize will be transformed into veterinary medicine scholarships for young talents who want to specialize in treating these extraordinary animals." Claire's eyes widened, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. Her dream of becoming a veterinarian, which had always seemed so distant, suddenly gained a real possibility. "And more," continued the presenter, "the first beneficiary will be young Claire, whose presentation with Valiant showed us today that there are no limitations when there is love and dedication." The audience erupted in applause. Donna Zephyr, who hadn't stopped crying since the beginning of that sequence of events, hugged Carlos, who was also struggling to contain his tears. "But of course," Alvaro added, turning to Claire, "this is only if you accept the idea of the two families. What do you say?" Valiant, as if understanding every word, moved between Claire and Alvaro, his tail wagging in a way that seemed to unite the two worlds that had previously seemed so distant. "I think Valiant has already decided for all of us," said Helena, smiling as she saw the dog so at ease between his two families. At that moment, everyone understood that they were witnessing not just the end of a contest, but the beginning of something much bigger. The transformation that had begun with the abandonment of a blind puppy was now completing in a way that no one could have predicted. A week after the contest, the old abandoned warehouse in the Capão Redondo region began to gain new life. Workers were renovating the space that would become the headquarters of the Valiant Foundation, dedicated to the treatment and support of animals with special needs. Claire followed every detail of the transformation with enthusiasm, always with Valiant by her side. The dog, now even more confident, seemed to perfectly understand his role as inspiration for the project. "This will be the physiotherapy room," explained Alvaro, who had made a point of personally overseeing the project. "And over there we'll have a training space, just like the one you had in the building's backyard. But much bigger," Claire completed, imagining how many other animals could be helped there. The news of the foundation had spread quickly through the city. Marcus Vieira, who was following the development of the story, was preparing a special series of reports titled Heart's Gazes, focusing not on business scandals, but on Alvaro Montenegro's personal transformation. "You really have changed," commented the journalist during an interview at the renovation site. "What exactly happened?" Alvaro looked at Claire, who was playing with Valiant on the other side of the warehouse. "Let's just say I needed to go blind to start truly seeing," he replied with a smile. Valiant's new routine had naturally established itself. During the week, he continued living with Claire and Carlos, maintaining his training and participating in the foundation's activities. On weekends, he visited the Montenegro mansion, where Princess had regained her joy upon reuniting with her puppy. "It's amazing how they immediately recognized each other," commented Helena, watching mother and son playing in the mansion's garden. "It's as if they had never been separated." The impact of the foundation began to spread throughout the community. Donna Zephyr, with her experience in caring for street animals, was invited to be one of the project coordinators. Carlos, in turn, in addition to keeping his work at the auto shop, began to help with the maintenance of the foundation's equipment. "I never imagined that the day Claire brought Valiant home would change our lives so much," he commented during a breakfast. Claire, who now attended private classes to prepare for her future veterinary course, was developing an increasingly deep understanding of the special needs of animals. "You know, Dad," she said one day as they studied together, "I think Valiant isn't special just because he's different. He's special because he taught us to be different too." Alvaro Montenegro's transformation went beyond the foundation. In his companies, he began to implement significant changes. He created fairer benefit programs for employees, established inclusion policies, and began dedicating part of the profits to social projects. "Money and power mean nothing if we don't know how to use them to do good," he explained during a meeting with shareholders, surprising everyone with his new philosophy. Helena observed the changes in her husband with a mixture of pride and relief. The man she had fallen in love with years ago was finally finding his way back. On a particularly significant afternoon, the entire foundation team gathered to receive the first group of rescued animals, 3 dogs and 2 cats, all with different special needs. "Each of them has a different story," Claire explained to the volunteers with the wisdom she had learned from Valiant. "But they all deserve a second chance, just like Valiant had." As he watched the girl guiding the new volunteers, Alvaro felt a deep gratitude. His act of cruelty, which could have resulted in tragedy, had been transformed, through a child's kindness, into something much greater than he could have imagined. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find the true path," he said to Marcus Vieira, who continued documenting the story. "And sometimes we need the innocence of a child to show us the right direction." The sun was beginning to set, painting the São Paulo sky with shades of orange and pink. In the foundation's courtyard, Valiant was confidently guiding a newly arrived puppy, also blind, showing that sometimes the best teachers are those who have faced the same challenges. 6 months after its inauguration, the Valiant Foundation had become a reference point in Capão Redondo. What began as a modest project now occupied an entire complex, with a free veterinary clinic, a rehabilitation center for special animals, and a training school for young people interested in veterinary medicine. On a particularly busy Saturday morning, Claire was conducting a guided tour for a group of children from a local school. Valiant, as always, walked elegantly by her side, serving as living inspiration for her explanation. "And this is our sensory room," she explained, opening the door to a specially designed environment. It was inspired by the way Valiant perceives the world. Here, animals can develop their other senses to compensate for their limitations. Among the visitors was a little girl who was lovingly holding a kitten missing one of its paws. Her eyes shone as she listened to Claire speak. "My mum said no one would want to adopt Pipoca because of his paw," confessed the girl. "But I saw that he's special, just like Valiant." Claire smiled, remembering her own journey. "You know, sometimes people take a while to understand that being different doesn't mean being less special." In the Foundation's office, Alvaro and Carlos were discussing the next steps of the project. The unlikely partnership between the businessman and the mechanic had turned into a genuine friendship. "We need to expand the scholarship program," Carlos argued, showing a list of interested young people. "There are a lot of people wanting to learn, Alvaro." "I completely agree," replied the businessman, who had long since abandoned his old arrogant stance. "And I thought of something more. How about creating a training program for people with disabilities? They could work here with the animals." Helena, who had taken over the coordination of the Foundation's educational programs, entered the room bringing more news. "You won't believe it. Valiant's story has inspired 3 other cities to create similar projects." The news didn't surprise Marcus Vieira, who continued to follow the development of the Foundation. His series of reports, Heart's Gazes, had become a national phenomenon, inspiring people across the country. "You know what impresses me the most?" commented the journalist during one of his visits. "How a story that began with an act of cruelty has turned into something so beautiful." Donna Zephyr, who was passing by with a tray of coffee, added her wisdom. "That's because good has that power, my son. It transforms everything it touches." In the Foundation's garden, a specially designed space allowed the animals to play freely. Valiant had become a kind of mentor for the newcomers, especially the blind dogs. It was impressive to see how he patiently guided them, teaching them to use their other senses. "It's as if he knows exactly what they're feeling," observed Claire, watching Valiant help a newly arrived puppy orient itself in the space. "He does know," replied Helena, who had joined her in observation. "Just as you knew exactly what he needed that day." The success of the Foundation began to attract international attention. A European animal protection organization expressed interest in replicating the model in other countries. Alvaro, who previously only cared about profits and appearances, now found himself explaining to businessmen from various places how a blind dog had changed his worldview. "True success," he would say in his lectures, "is not in what we manage to accumulate, but in what we manage to transform." At home, in quieter moments, Claire still wrote in her diary about her experiences. On one of these nights, as Valiant slept at her feet, she recorded, "Today another animal got a new chance. It's amazing how each story that comes here is different, but they all have something in common: the ability to show that love doesn't see flaws, only possibilities. Valiant taught me that, and now we're teaching it to the whole world." The news arrived on a Tuesday morning. The land where the Valiant Foundation operated had been sold to a large developer. The new owner planned to build a shopping mall on the site and had given a 60-day deadline for evacuation. "But how is this possible?" asked Claire, her voice trembling as she saw the movement of people in suits taking measurements on the land. "The Foundation is so important to everyone." Alvaro, who had rushed to the site as soon as he heard the news, maintained a serious expression as he analyzed the documents with his lawyers. The old Alvaro would have resolved everything with his economic power, but he had learned that some battles needed to be won in a different way. "We won't give up," he assured Claire, "but we need to do this the right way." The news spread quickly through the community. Soon a crowd gathered in front of the Foundation. Families that had been helped, children who participated in educational programs, residents who had seen the neighborhood transform positively in recent months. Mrs. Zephyr organized a petition that in a few hours already had thousands of signatures. Carlos mobilized his contacts at the auto shop and other neighborhood establishments. Helena activated her network of relationships in society. "Look at this," said Marcus Vieira, who had arrived to cover the story. "The Foundation has united people who would normally never meet. This is what we need to show the world." Valiant, sensing the tension in the air, began to act differently. The dog circulated among the gathered people, offering comfort here and there, as if understanding that his role went beyond being just the Foundation's mascot. "He always knows when someone needs support," Claire observed, seeing how Valiant approached, especially the children who seemed most worried. It was during one of these interactions that Claire had an idea. Gathering all the children who attended the Foundation, she proposed something special, a video showing the impact of the project on each of their lives. "We can show how the Foundation changed not only the lives of animals, but of everyone in the neighborhood," she explained excitedly. The idea quickly gained momentum. Young veterinary students shared their stories of overcoming. Families reported how their special animals had found a new chance. Local merchants talked about how the neighborhood had transformed. Alvaro, observing the mobilization, realized that he was witnessing something much bigger than a simple social project. The Valiant Foundation had become a symbol of transformation and hope. "You know," he said to Helena, as they watched the recordings of the testimonials, "before I thought solving problems was just a matter of money and power. Now I see that real changes happen when people unite for something they believe in." The video, edited with the help of volunteers, went viral on social media. The Foundation's story, which began with the abandonment of a blind puppy, now touched hearts across the country. Reports began to appear in various media outlets. "It's amazing," commented Carlos, seeing the repercussions. "How something that started so small could grow so much." Claire, who was by his side with Valiant, answered with the wisdom she had developed throughout that journey. "It's because we planted love, Dad, and love is like those seeds that the wind carries. We never know how far they will go." The mobilization began to take effect. Entrepreneurs touched by the cause offered support. Local politicians began to discuss laws to protect social projects. The developer, pressured by public opinion, agreed to open a dialogue. On a particularly tense night of negotiations, Valiant, who was accompanying Claire at a vigil in front of the foundation, began to bark differently. His behavior caught everyone's attention. "What is it, boy?" Claire asked, knowing her friend's signals well. "Are you trying to tell us something?" Valiant's unusual behavior intrigued everyone participating in the vigil in front of the foundation. The dog continued barking rhythmically, moving towards the back of the property, where old abandoned buildings served as storage. "He's trying to show us something," said Claire, who knew her friend's instincts well. Without hesitation, she grabbed a flashlight and followed Valiant, accompanied by Alvaro, Carlos, and some volunteers. The group crossed the courtyard, guided by the dog's increasingly insistent barks. When they reached an old building, Valiant stopped in front of a wall covered with ivy. His muzzle pointed directly at something hidden by the vegetation. "Wait," said Alvaro, approaching. "There's something here." Carefully pushing aside the ivy, they discovered an old bronze plaque, almost completely oxidized by time. Carlos approached with a more powerful flashlight, and gradually the letters became visible. "Municipal Institute for Animal Protection, 1922. This is a..." Helena, who had joined the group, left the sentence hanging. "It's a historical heritage," completed Marcus Vieira, already photographing the discovery. "The city's first animal protection center operated exactly in this location." The discovery completely changed the course of negotiations. According to municipal legislation, historic buildings could not be demolished to make way for commercial developments. More than that, they should be preserved and preferably maintain their original function. "It's as if the past and present met," observed Mrs. Zephyr, emotional, "as if this place had always been destined to care for animals that need help." The news of the discovery spread quickly. Historians confirmed the importance of the site for the city. The institute, founded by a traditional São Paulo family, had been a pioneer in the humane treatment of animals in the early 20th century. "But how did Valiant know?" asked one of the children who attended the foundation. Claire smiled, stroking her friend's ears. "Valiant has always known how to see things that our eyes can't see." The developer, faced with the repercussions of the case and the historical discovery, proposed an agreement. Instead of buying the land, it would become a partner of the Valiant Foundation. The shopping center would be built in another location, and part of the profits would be allocated to the maintenance and expansion of the Foundation's projects. "Sometimes the best deals are those where everyone wins," declared the president of the developer during the signing of the partnership, under applause from the gathered community. The ceremony of declaring the building as historical heritage turned into a great neighborhood celebration. Children, adults, animals, all gathered to witness the moment when past and present united to guarantee the future. During the party, Alvaro watched Claire playing with Valiant in the courtyard. The dog, which he once considered a problem to be discarded, had become not only a symbol of overcoming, but a true guardian of history and hope. "You know what's most incredible?" he commented to Helena. "If we hadn't gone through all this place could have been lost forever." "It's as they say," she replied, smiling. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find the right path." At the end of that memorable night, as the community was still celebrating, Claire wrote another entry in her diary. "Today we discovered that the Valiant Foundation didn't start with us. It has always been here, waiting to be rediscovered. And it was Valiant, whom many thought was limited by not being able to see, who showed us the way. I think that's how the universe works. When we open our hearts to help others, we discover that good always finds a way to continue. The discovery of the historical plaque transformed the Valiant Foundation into a tourist attraction in Capão Redondo. Historians and archaeologists began a meticulous restoration work on the original building, revealing architectural details that told the story of the city's first animal protection center. "Look at this, Dad," exclaimed Claire, observing the old photographs that had been found during the restoration. They were already taking care of special animals back then. The black and white images showed touching scenes, volunteers assisting injured cart horses, dogs with disabilities being rehabilitated, cats receiving specialized care. It was as if the past extended a hand to the present, confirming that they were on the right path. Alvaro, who personally supervised the restoration project, found something particularly significant, an old diary belonging to the original founder of the institute. "Every animal deserves a chance to show its worth," he read aloud, the yellowed pages trembling slightly in his hands. This phrase could have been written today. The history of the original institute began to intertwine with that of the Valiant Foundation in surprising ways. It was discovered that the old founder, Donna Amelia Santos, had dedicated her life to changing the way society viewed animals with special needs. "It's as if she had planted a seed that waited all this time to bloom again," observed Helena, as she organized an exhibition with the historical items found. The restoration work also revealed architectural aspects that seemed perfectly suited to current needs. Gentle ramps, spacious and well-ventilated areas, spaces designed specifically for rehabilitation. "It's not a coincidence," affirmed Mrs. Zephyr with her usual wisdom. "It's as if this place had been waiting for Valiant all this time." Claire, inspired by the discoveries, began to research more about the history of veterinary medicine and the treatment of special animals. Her study notes now included not only modern techniques, but also the traditional methods that had been developed at the old institute. "Did you know they already used music therapy to calm nervous animals?" she shared during one of the Foundation's meetings. "Just like what we do with Valiant." The impact of the historical discoveries went beyond the sentimental aspect. Universities began to show interest in establishing partnerships with the Foundation, recognizing it as a center for historical preservation and innovation in animal care. "It's amazing how everything connects," reflected Carlos, observing the ever-increasing movement of people at the site. "We started wanting to save a little blind dog, and we ended up rescuing an important piece of the city's history." Valiant, as always, seemed to perfectly understand his role in all that story. On guided tours, he made a point of leading groups to the wall where the plaque had been found, as if he wanted to remind everyone how that discovery had happened. "He's our guardian of history," Claire joked proudly. On a particularly significant afternoon, while supervising the restoration of one of the old rooms, Alvaro found another surprise, a letter from the old founder, addressed to the future. "To whoever finds this place," he read, moved, "know that love for animals is a universal language that transcends time. Take care of this space as we cared for it, and allow it to continue being a beacon of hope for those whom others consider different or imperfect." The words, written almost a century ago, seemed to have been specifically intended for them. Claire, who was present at the moment of discovery, hugged Valiant tightly. "It's as if she knew that one day we would arrive here," said the girl, her eyes shining with emotion. "Maybe she did know," replied Alvaro, carefully storing the letter. "Sometimes the universe has mysterious ways of uniting people and stories." That night, as the sun set over the historic building under restoration, Claire made an observation that touched everyone's heart. "It's funny, isn't it? Valiant can't see all this beauty he helped discover, but it was he who taught us to see beyond appearances. Maybe that's the greatest treasure we found here."